Greetings, travelers of the void. You have entered the domain of the void-born terrors. I have brought you cruelty. I have brought you cold things and hungry things, and things that wore kindness like a lure. Tonight I bring you the opposite, and it is worse. And I want you to understand before we begin why it is worse. Tonight the monsters are kind. 9 warriors in yellow armor came down to a dying world to save people the Imperium had already written off. And they were gentle, and they were courteous, and they suffered every wound they could take, instead of the mortals they were shielding. And they apologized, over and over, for things that were not their fault. And every single one of them died. Not because they were beaten. Nobody beat them. They died because the universe itself had decided, a long time ago, that these particular sons of sorrow would never once be allowed to win. And it spent an entire day proving it, in the smallest and most obscene ways it could find. They are called the Lamenters, the cursed sons. And this is the story of the worst luck in the galaxy, told by a woman who watched 9 heroes give everything they had, so that a few dozen nobodies could see one more sunrise, and who has spent the rest of her life understanding that in the 41st millennium, being good is not rewarded. It is targeted. Listen close, traveler, and when you find yourself near the end, praying for these men to catch just one break, remember who is telling you the story, and that I already know how it ends. Chapter 1. The Answered Call. The world was called Cadmus, and by the time the Lamenters came, it was already a corpse that had not yet been told. Neris' soul was a records adjutant. That is a real job and a small one. She kept the manifests for the 4th Hab district of a mid-tier hive on an unremarkable mining world, which meant she spent her days logging ration distribution and birth tithes and the movement of labor gangs into ledgers that nobody above her ever read. She was 34. She had a good hand and a careful mind and a talent which had never once been useful to her before that week, for keeping an accurate count of frightened people. She would tell you, if you asked her, that she was the least important person in this entire story. And she would be wrong, but only because she survived to tell it. And the ones who mattered did not. Let me give you the world first, because you should stand on it before it burns. Cadmus was a mining world, and it had been an ugly, hard, ordinary place long before it became a dying one. The 4th Hab district, where Neris kept her ledgers, was a stacked warren of rockcrete habs and ore processing stacks, home to 250,000 low-grade workers and their families, and it had a smell recycled air and machine oil, and too many people, and a rhythm, the shift bells, the ration queues, the small grinding routine of a life at the bottom of the Imperium. And Neris had lived that life for 34 years, and had expected to die in it, quietly, of the lung rot or old age, unremembered, which is the ordinary fate, and not the worst one. She thought about that at the end. She thought about how the 4th district had never once, in 400 years, mattered to anyone above it, how its people were a tithe figure and a labor quota and nothing else, how not one soul in the Imperium's vast machine had ever known or cared that they existed as people rather than numbers. And she thought about how it took the end of the world and the arrival of 9 cursed strangers for anyone in the whole galaxy to look at the people of the 4th Hab district and see souls worth crossing the stars to save. That is its own grim dark truth, and Neris found it early, and it never left her. That the people of Cadmus lived their whole lives unseen by the Imperium they served, and were seen for the first and only time, by the one kind of angel the Imperium had thrown away. Cadmus died the way worlds die when the great devourer comes. That is the enemy here, and I will name it once and then let it be the weather, because that is what it was. Weather, a thing without malice or mind, a tide. A splinter of a tyrannid hive fleet had drifted into the Cadmus system 3 months before, and it had done what those things do. It had come down out of the sky in living spores, and it had begun, patiently and without hunger the way you or I understand hunger, to eat the world. Not the people first. The world, the biosphere, the atmosphere, the very soil, rendered down and drawn up into the sky to feed the fleet, so that Cadmus was being consumed from the outside in, its horizons closing, its air thinning, its oceans going to a grey scum, and the 11 billion people on it herded into shrinking pockets of the still living by an enemy that was not attacking them so much as harvesting the room they stood in. The Imperium had done the arithmetic and left. That is not cruelty. It is doctrine. And it is, in the cold accounting of a galaxy on fire, correct. A hive fleet cannot be stopped by holding a single world. You fight it at the strategic scale, or you do not fight it at all. And a world already this far gone is not a battle. It is a loss to be minimized. So the Navy came, and it took off what could be taken off in the time it had. A few million, the productive, the young, the useful. And then it prepared to do the last mercy the Imperium has for a world it cannot save, which is to deny the enemy the meal. Exterminatus. Burn the biosphere to ash so the fleet gets nothing, and move the ships to the next fight, and strike Cadmus from the rolls. Neris Sol's district did not make the lists. The 4th Hab district was low tithe, unproductive, full of the old and the sick and the labor gangs whose contracts had expired. And when the withdrawal order came down, the lifter capacity was allocated by tithe grade, and the 4th district's grade was too low, and so 61,000 people were simply not scheduled. There was no announcement. There is never an announcement. There was a schedule, and they were not on it, and the schedule is the only thing the Imperium considers real. Neris found out because she kept the manifests. She saw the lifter allocations come through the cogitator, and she saw her district's number was 0, and she understood, sitting alone at her desk with the dust of a dying world coming in under the door, exactly what 0 meant. And she did the one thing a records adjutant can do, which is she sent a message. She had no authority to send it, and no one to send it to, so she sent it to everyone. An open astropathic burst, unencrypted, unpermissioned, the kind of thing that ends careers, except that there were no careers left on Cadmus. 4th Hab district, 61,000 souls, no lifter allocation, requesting emergency evacuation. She sent it into the void, and she did not expect an answer, because she had kept records long enough to know that the void does not answer people like her. The Lamenters answered. I need to tell you who they were before they land, because everything that happens after depends on you understanding it, and because the Imperium has spent 10,000 years making sure people like Neris Sol never learn it. They were Space Marines, the Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's Angels, the same in kind as the Carcharodons of the Outer Dark and the Salamanders of the Deep, but they were a particular kind, and a doomed one. They descended from the bloodline of Sanguinius, the Angel, the most beautiful and beloved of the Emperor's sons, who died 10,000 years ago at the hands of the War Master Horus in the war that broke the galaxy. And that bloodline carries a wound, 2 wounds. The first is a thirst, a craving for blood that rises in them in battle and must be managed always by their priests, or it takes them. The second is worse. It is called the Black Rage, and it is a kind of inherited memory. The death of Sanguinius himself, burned into the gene seed, waiting. Under enough stress, enough grief, enough blood, a son of the angel can lose himself entirely into that memory, can come to believe that he is Sanguinius in the last hour, facing Horus, and become a thing of pure and mindless fury that no longer knows friend from foe. Every warrior of that blood carries the angel's death inside him, like a splinter working toward the heart. And the Lamenters carry one thing more, which is theirs alone, and which the rest of the Imperium speaks of only to mock. They are cursed, not figuratively. The sons of the Lament have been the unluckiest warriors in the history of the Adeptus Astartes, and it is not superstition, it is a record. They have been brought to the edge of extinction, not once, but again and again, by disasters that no tactician could have predicted and no valor could have prevented, until the rest of the Space Marine chapters, who are not sentimental men, quietly came to believe that the Lamenters are marked, that misfortune follows them the way a shadow follows a lamp, and that to fight beside them is to invite the universe to notice you. You should know where the curse comes from, or where they believe it comes from, because it is the root of everything, and because it is a genuinely tragic thing, and the Imperium tells it as a joke. The Lamenters were founded long ago from the blood of Sanguinius to be a proud chapter, and they have spent their entire existence being punished for trying to be better than the Imperium allows. Long ago, in a great war among the Space Marines themselves, the Lamenters made a choice. They tried to stop the fighting, to mediate, to spare lives on both sides, to find the outcome with the least death in it. And for that, for the crime of trying to be merciful in a war that had no place for mercy, they were judged and sentenced and sent out on a penitent crusade, a century of wandering and war and atonement, to bleed for their compassion until the debt was paid. And on that crusade the disasters began and did not stop. Fleets lost, worlds lost, brothers lost by the thousand to accidents and ambushes and impossible ill fortune, until a chapter that had numbered 1,000 was reduced again and again to scattered handfuls, and the rest of the Adeptus Astartes stopped pitying them and started avoiding them. And the word went round that the sons of the Lament were cursed. Whether it is a true curse, a thing laid on them by the warp, or by some power that punishes mercy, or simply the accumulated arithmetic of a chapter that keeps choosing the harder, kinder, more dangerous path and paying for it, no one knows. And it does not matter, because the effect is the same. The Lamenters are the proof, written across 100 years and 100 worlds, that in the galaxy of the 41st millennium, there is a price on goodness, and that the price is everything, and that they keep paying it and will not stop. They knew it about themselves. That is the part I most need you to hold. They had a century of evidence, and when a records adjutant on a doomed world screamed 61,000 names into the dark, the Lamenters, 9 of them, all that was in range, a crusade detachment doing penance across the stars for an old crime, turned their one ship toward Cadmus, knowing their own curse, knowing that their coming would very probably make everything worse, and came anyway, because that is the other thing about them, and it is the thing that killed them. Every other chapter in the Imperium would have read Neris Sol's message and done the arithmetic and moved on correctly. The Lamenters have a creed, and it is not a boast. They do not boast. It is closer to a confession, and it goes, "For those we cherish, we die in glory." And they have decided, as their penance, as their nature, as the one thing their curse cannot take from them, that they will not leave people to die. Not for strategy, not for survival, not to spare themselves, ever. Even when leaving would be wiser, even when coming will doom them. Especially then. They translated in-system, and their first stroke of bad luck was waiting for them before they ever saw the world. The warp is not a sea you cross cleanly, and a navigator steers it by feel and by the light of the Astronomicon. And the Lamenters' navigator was old and good, and had made the run 1,000 times. And the tides around Cadmus, disturbed by the shadow the Hive fleet casts in the warp, were wrong in a way the charts could not have shown, and the translation went long. Not catastrophically, just wrong. They came out of the warp not in close orbit but at the system's edge. 11 hours of real space burn from Cadmus. 11 hours they did not have, because the Navy's exterminatus was already scheduled, and the clock was already running, and the Lamenters had just lost half a day to a tide that no one could have predicted, and no one could have prevented. Neris did not know any of that. What Neris knew was that 31 hours after she sent her message, when the district's air had gone thin enough that the old were dying in the night, and the tide shapes had begun to come over the eastern wall, a single voice came onto the district's emergency channel, and it was calm, and it was courteous, and it said, "4th Hab District, this is Sergeant Sariel of the Lamenters. We received your message. We are coming. Hold on. We are so sorry we are not already there." Neris' soul put her head down on her manifest desk and wept, which she had not done once in 31 hours, because in 31 hours nothing had made her cry, and "we are so sorry we are not already there" undid her completely. Understand what those 31 hours had been, so you understand why. Neris had spent them being the only functioning authority in a district that had ceased to have any. The senior administrators had gone up on the last scheduled lifter 3 days before with the productive workers, leaving the 4th District's paperwork and the 4th District's people to whoever was left holding a slate, which was Neris. So she had held it. She had organized the ration of the failing air, deciding, with no authority and no training and no one to ask, which sealed shelters got the last of the district's oxygen reserves and which did not, which is to say she had spent 31 hours deciding who breathed, and she had done it because someone had to, and there had been no one else, and she had not wept, because the people watching her needed her not to. She had held 900 terrified souls, together with a slate and a steady voice and a talent for counting, and she had done it believing the whole time that she was only choosing the order in which they would all die. And then a voice from the sky had said her name, and said, "We are coming," and said, "We are so sorry." And the thing that broke her was not the hope, it was the apology. In 34 years of Imperial life, in 14 years of keeping the Imperium's ledgers, not one authority above her had ever once apologized to Neris' soul for anything. Because the Imperium does not apologize to its numbers, the Imperium does not conceive of itself as owing anything to a 4th District records adjutant. And the first entity in her entire life to say sorry to her, and mean it, was a space marine, an angel of the Emperor, a being so far above her that the distance had no measure, apologizing for being 4 hours late to save her life. She wept because she had not known, until that moment, how starved she was for one person in authority to treat her as though she were owed anything at all. That is a small horror and a true one, and the account is full of them. They dropped 4 hours later, and the drop was the second stroke. A space marine comes down from orbit in a drop pod or a gunship, fire and fury, and the Lamenters came down in their Thunderhawk, and the Thunderhawk was old. Everything they owned was old. A chapter this unlucky does not get new things, and it had been maintained with the obsessive care of men who cannot afford to lose anything, and it failed anyway on final approach. In a way the tech priests would later say was a 1 in 10,000 event, a fuel line pressure fault that no inspection would have caught at the worst possible altitude, over the worst possible ground. The pilot, Brother Halcyo, held it together long enough to keep it out of the crowded district and put it down in the ruins 2 kilometers east, and he did it well, and it still broke apart on landing, and the Lamenters walked out of the wreck of their own gunship into a dead world on foot, carrying what they could, having lost their air support, their heavy munitions reserve, and their fastest way to the landing fields before they had fired a single shot. The surf crew of the Thunderhawk had died in the crash. The mortal servants who tended the gunship, all of them, killed on impact. And the Lamenters had come up out of the wreck carrying that too. 9 warriors walking away from the burning bodies of their own people, because there was no time to do otherwise and no way to save them, into a rescue mission to save strangers. Nerys learned about the serfs later, and it stayed with her, that the Lamenters' first loss on Cadmus was their own household, that they had begun the day by being unable to save the people closest to them, and had gone straight on to break themselves saving people they had never met, and that this too is a kind of grief the account never quite has room for, the ones the Lamenters could not save on the way to saving anyone at all. That is part of why they were grave when Nerys first saw them. She thought it was their nature, and it was, but it was also that they had already lost, that very hour, before the rescue even began, that the curse had opened the account with deaths none of them could have prevented, and that they came up into the 4th district already grieving, already behind, and still crossed the square toward 900 strangers, and knelt down and said, "How many are you?" She did not know, when Sariel took his helm off and said her name so gently, what he had already walked away from that day. She learned it later, and when she learned it, it recast the whole first meeting, because it meant the tenderness he showed her was not the tenderness of a man with nothing else on his heart. It was the tenderness of a man carrying fresh grief, choosing, in spite of it, to be gentle with a frightened clerk. That is harder. And he did it as though it cost nothing, and it cost everything. And that was the first of 100 times that day that Nerys' soul watched a Lamenter pay a price he refused to let her see. 9 of them came up out of the eastern ruins into the 4th Hab district as the light was failing, and Nerys' soul saw the Emperor's angels for the first time, and I want to give you exactly what she saw, because it is the beginning of the love that makes this a tragedy and not just a slaughter. They were tall, not as tall as the terror stories, not the 8-foot giants of the deep, but tall and broad and armored, and their armor was yellow, a deep, warm, honey and amber yellow, the color of something that wanted to be seen, that had no interest in hiding, and it was, even then, filthy, streaked with ash, scorched from the crash, spattered with the grey scum of the dying world, and on every shoulder plate, under the muck, there was a pattern of black and yellow squares, a checker, and on every breastplate there was a device that made Nerys' breath catch, a heart, a human heart, worked in metal, and from it 3 drops of blood, a bleeding heart. That was their sign. Not a skull, not a lightning bolt, not a snarling beast. A heart, bleeding, worn openly on the chest, and Nerys looked at 61,000 people's last hope, walking toward her out of the ruins in filthy yellow with bleeding hearts on their breasts, and she thought. She told the scribe this, years later, and could not say it without her voice going. She thought, oh, they're sad. They came anyway and they're sad. The one in front stopped in front of her, because she was the one holding the manifest. Because even at the end of the world, the person holding the list is the person in charge. And he went down on one knee so that his helm was level with her face, and he reached up and unsealed it and took it off, and the face beneath was pale and fine-boned and grave and younger than she expected and older than anything, and he said, "Adjutant Soul, how do you... Your name was on the message. I have been saying it to my brothers for 4 hours." He said it as though it mattered, as though her name were a thing worth carrying. "I am Sariel. I have 9 brothers and a great deal of resolve, and I will not lie to you, almost nothing else, because we have had a difficult arrival." A ghost of something crossed the grave face. "We usually do. Adjutant, how many are you?" And Neris' soul looked at her manifest, at the number she had been maintaining for 35 hours, the way a drowning woman maintains her grip, and she said, 61,000 this morning. We've been losing them to the air. And she gestured east, at the wall, at the shapes. We're down to about 900 that can still walk, in this district. The rest have gone into the deep habs and I can't reach them and the lifters aren't coming and... 900, said Sariel gently, and she watched him do the arithmetic. The same arithmetic she had done, the arithmetic that ended in a number none of them could carry. And she watched him decide not to say it. 9 warriors, 900 people, a dead world, a closing horizon, a countdown to exterminatus she did not yet know about, and no gunship, and no reserve, and the worst luck in the galaxy. Neris asked him one question before they started, because she had to, because she was a records adjutant, and she needed the number to be real. She asked, "Can you do it? Truthfully, can 9 of you get 900 of us to the fields?" And Sergeant Sariel looked at her for a moment, and she braced for the comforting lie, the thing any officer of the Imperium would have said, and instead he gave her the truth, which was the first of the great many truths he gave her that she did not want. "No," he said, "not 900, not all of you. I will not tell you otherwise, because you will make better decisions if you know." He let that sit, and then he said the rest of it, and it is the sentence that made Neris' soul follow this man to the edge of a burning world. "But I can get some of you, more than none. Every meter we walk together is people who would have died in this district tonight, and did not. I cannot promise you a number, Adjutant. I can only promise you that we will make the number as large as it can be made, and that we will still be trying when we fall. That is all we have ever been able to promise anyone. It has never once been enough. We offer it anyway." He put out his hand, his enormous armored hand, to a records adjutant, the way you would to an equal, and Neris' soul took it, her whole hand disappearing into his, and that was the contract, sealed on a dying world between a demigod and a clerk. And it was a better and more honest contract than any she had ever logged in 14 years of keeping the Imperium's promises. "Then we had better start," said Sergeant Sariel of the Lamenters, and put his helm back on, "because it is a long way to the fields, and we are already so far behind." Chapter 2. The Long Way to the Fields. Before I take you west, I have to tell you about the first hour of the column, because it is the last hour of anything like hope, and because it is where Neris' soul learned to love them, and you cannot feel the fall unless you have stood where she stood at the top of it. 900 people. That was the column when it formed. 900 out of 61,000. The ones who could still walk. The ones Neris had gathered in the district square with her manifest and her cracked voice. And she had been terrified, in the moment before the Lamenters arrived, that they would look at 900 half-dead mortals and do the sane thing, the arithmetic thing, and choose the strongest 200 and leave the rest. Every Imperial authority she had ever known would have. The lifter schedule that abandoned her whole district was that arithmetic made policy. The Lamenters did not do the arithmetic. They took all 900. Sariel walked the square once, looking at the people. and Nerys walked beside him waiting for the culling, for the these can come and these cannot, and it never came. What came instead was the sergeant stopping in front of a man on a stretcher, a rig hand with a crushed spine who could not walk, who could not even sit, who by every rule of triage was exactly the kind of loss you accept to save the many. And Sariel looked at the man for a moment, and then simply said over his shoulder, "Brother Zadiel, carry this one." And Zadiel picked the stretcher up, and that was the entire discussion. And Nerys' soul stood in the square and understood that she had spent her whole life inside a machine that treated people as numbers, and that these strange, sad giants were the first thing she had ever met that refused to. That refusal is why 9 of them tried to move 900 people, 19 kilometers, which was tactically insane, which every manual forbids, which is the single decision that doomed them. And it is the decision Nerys loved them for, and it is the decision the curse punished. And those are the same decision, and that is the whole terrible knot of the Lamenters, in one square on one dying morning. The thing that made them worth loving is the thing that got them killed, and there was never any separating the two. The Salvation Fields were 19 kilometers west. That was the whole of it, and it does not sound like much, and it was the distance across which the universe unmade 9 of the finest men Nerys' soul ever knew, one stroke of bad luck at a time. 19 kilometers through a dying hive with 900 people who could barely breathe, and a last Navy lifter that would wait at the fields until the exterminator's clock ran out, and not 1 second longer. Sariel told her about the clock on the first night, because he had decided, she came to understand this was a principle with him, that he would not lie to her, ever, about anything, no matter how much a lie would have helped. They had gotten the column moving, 900 souls in a ragged file through the ash-choked transit ways. The Lamenters spread along its length, and at the first halt, he crouched beside her and told her, flatly and quietly, that the Imperial Navy intended to burn Cadmus in approximately 29 hours, that the last lifter at the Salvation Fields would lift at the 28th hour, whether or not they had reached it, and that 19 kilometers through this terrain with this column would, by his estimate, take somewhere between 22 and 30 hours, and that the margin was therefore very thin and entirely dependent on nothing else going wrong. "And things go wrong around us, Adjutant," he said. "I will not pretend to you that they don't. You should know what you have hitched your people to. We are the Lamenters. We are unlucky. It is not a figure of speech." He looked out over the column. 900 exhausted people in the ash. "If there were another chapter within reach, I would tell you to pray for them instead of us. There isn't. There's us. I am sorry. We will give you everything we have." Nerys did not understand that first night what he was telling her. She thought it was humility, the strange, sad humility of these strange, sad giants. She understood by the end. The Lamenters were not warning her about the enemy. They were warning her about themselves, about the cloud of misfortune they carried, the way the universe leaned on them, the way the dice came up wrong around them so reliably that they had built a whole grieving identity around it. She had asked the Void for angels, and the Void had sent her the one kind of angel that comes with its own curse attached, and the curse was about to start collecting. Nerys learned the shape of them in the first hours, before the dying really started, and it is the part of the account she returned to most, because it is the part that made everything after unbearable. She learned that they were courteous, not the grand cold courtesy of the devotional plates, the small kind, the human kind, the kind that costs something. When they moved a person out of the way of a firing lane, they said your pardon. When Brother Ostian took a child up onto his back to carry it, he asked the mother first, actually asked, and waited for her to nod. An 8-foot warrior of the Adeptus Astartes, asking a Hab worker's permission in the middle of the end of the world. When the column stopped to rest, the Lamenters did not rest. They went among the people, and they did the thing that Nerys had never once seen a figure of authority do in 34 years of Imperial life. They listened. They crouched down, always crouched, to bring their faces level, and they let frightened people tell them about the family members left in the deep Habs, the ones who could not be reached. And they did not offer false comfort, and they did not brush it aside. They simply took it. The grief, the way you take a weight from someone whose arms have failed, and they carried it too, along with everything else they were carrying. Brother Kalen, the young one, gave away his water. Nerys saw it, and it broke something in her that had not broken through any of the horror. Space Marines do not need water the way mortals do. They can go a long time, but they carry it for the purity of the flesh, for the rites. And Kalen, walking the column, found an old woman whose lips had cracked and gone blue with the thinning air, and he unslung his own canteen and knelt and gave it to her, all of it, and stayed kneeling while she drank, one enormous gauntlet supporting the back of her head because her own arms were shaking too hard to hold it. And when she had finished, he said, "There, better," in that deep, quiet voice, and the old woman looked up into the pale, grave face of a demigod and patted his cheek, the way you pat a grandchild, and Kalen let her, and something in the young warrior's eyes when she did it was so raw and so young that Nerys had to look away. That is what the universe was about to spend the next day destroying, one impossible accident at a time. I need you to have it fixed in your mind. The water, the crouching, your pardon. Because the horror of this story is not that terrible things happen to warriors. Terrible things happen to warriors constantly. That is what warriors are for. The horror is that terrible things happened, relentlessly, unfairly, impossibly, to the kindest creatures Nerys' soul ever met, and that they saw it coming and came anyway, and stayed gentle the whole way down. They fought that night, and they were magnificent, and I want to be very precise about this, because it matters to everything after. They never once fought badly. The tide came over the eastern Habs in the dark. The lesser bioforms first, the fast ones, a chittering flood of Talon and chitin pouring down the transitways toward the soft column of mortals. And the Lamenters met them, and it was not a battle so much as a demonstration. Sarael had placed his men perfectly. Brother Ostian, the biggest of them, anchored the rear with a heavy bolter and turned the main transitway into a killing ground, a strobing wall of mass reactive fire. Brother Tavian, the oldest, the veteran, held the left flank alone and did not give a meter. The young one, Kalen, and the quiet one, Kale, ranged ahead and killed the things that tried to come around. And through all of it, the Lamenters put themselves, physically, between every bioform and every human being. Not tactically, not because the doctrine said to, but as a reflex so deep, it was clearly not a decision at all. Nerys watched Brother Tavian take a talon strike meant for an old man that would have opened the old man like a ration tin, take it on his own pauldron, not even break his rhythm, and kill the thing that had thrown it and move on. And the old man never even knew how close he had come. They held. 9 warriors held 900 people against the first tide of a hive fleet and did not lose one civilian. And Nerys' soul began, that first night, to believe. That is the trap. That is the whole engine of the horror I am walking you through. And I am doing it deliberately, the way it was done to her. I am going to let you believe, over and over. And then I am going to take it away. Because that is what happened. And that is what it is to love the Lamenters. There is a thing that happened during that first fight that Nerys did not understand until much later, and it is the first time the Second War showed itself to her. The war the Lamenters were fighting inside their own skulls the entire time. At the height of it, with the tide breaking against them and the bolters hammering, one of the Lamenters, she did not know then which, she learned later it was Ostian, began to sing. It came over the open channel, low under the gunfire, a few bars of something in a language she did not know, in a voice of aching, unbearable beauty, and it stopped as suddenly as it began, and immediately the priest Rael's voice came over the same channel, sharp, urgent, in a tone she had not heard from any of them. Ostian, count your breathing, count it with me. And the singing did not come again. She thought it was a battle hymn. It was not. She learned from Rael at the end that when a son of Sanguinius begins to sing in battle, beautifully, helplessly, without meaning to, it is a warning sign, one of the first, the red thirst rising, the blood song starting up in him, the thing that comes before the rage. The Lamenters do not sing war hymns. They sing because the curse makes them, and their brothers listen for it the way you listen for a change in a sick person's breathing at night. And a sanguinary priest's ear is trained above all else to catch the first bar of that terrible music and put a stop to it before it finishes. Nerys' soul fell asleep that first night for 2 hours in the ash, guarded by angels, and she dreamed of nothing, and it was the last good sleep of her life. And somewhere out past the firelight, the Lamenters did not sleep, because they do not, and they watched the dark for the tide, and they watched each other for the song, and they were losing both wars already, and they did not tell her because she needed the sleep, and they had decided she should have it. They held the tide, and then the wall came down. Not the enemy's doing, nobody's doing. The district's western void shield, a great atmospheric barrier, part of the hive's environmental system that had been holding back the worst of the ash and the thinning air. The western shield failed at the exact moment the column reached it, in a cascade that the surviving Mechanicus logs would later attribute to a power-routing fault of a kind that occurs, on average, once in several centuries of a shield generator's operational life. It failed closed. The great blast doors of the district's western gate, which should have opened to let the column through onto the arterial road to the fields, sealed instead, 40 meters of adamantium slamming down and fusing, sealing the 4th Hab district on the one side they needed open, at the one moment they needed it, for no reason anyone could ever name. The column stood in front of a wall that had not been there an hour ago, with the tide behind them and the clock running, and Nerys looked at Sergeant Sarael and saw him close his eyes behind his helm. She could not see it, but she knew it. She had already learned the set of his shoulders, and heard him say, on the open channel, very quietly, not quite to anyone, "There it is." Nerys did the arithmetic in front of the sealed wall, the same arithmetic Sarael was doing, and she felt the bottom go out of her, because she understood shields. She had logged their maintenance for years, and she understood that a shield generator fault of this kind does not happen. She had processed the service records of that exact generator. It had been inspected 8 weeks before. It was rated for 4 more centuries. Shields fail. Of course they fail. Everything on a dying world fails. But they fail slowly. They gutter and warn, and can be nursed. They do not slam shut, whole and instantaneous and permanent. At the precise second a rescue column reaches them. On the one side the column needs open. She said as much to Sarael, standing at the wall, because she wanted him to know it was not his fault, that no plan could have accounted for it, that this was not a failure of his generalship. And the sergeant looked at the 40 meters of fused adamantium and said, without any self-pity at all, in the flat, tired voice of a man reading a familiar page, "I know it wasn't the plan, Adjutant. It never is. This is what I meant this morning, when I told you what we are." He put one gauntleted hand flat against the cold metal, almost gently, the way Nerys had seen doctors touch a patient they could not save. A shield that has held for 400 years fails the hour we arrive. A gunship that has flown for 2 centuries dies on the one approach that matters. This is not misfortune, Adjutant. Misfortune is random. This, he took his hand off the wall. This has aim. I stopped asking why a long time ago. You will save yourself a great deal of grief if you never start. There was another way. There is always another way. That is the cruelty of it. The curse does not simply kill you. It makes you earn every meter of your dying. The maintenance underlevels ran beneath the western wall. The old service tunnels, the pump galleries, the same kind of deep dark that every hive keeps in its foundations. They could take the column down and under and up the far side. It would cost them hours they did not have, and it would take 900 failing people down into a lightless warren with the tide already in it. Because the tide was always already everywhere. That was the nature of it. But it was a way, and the Lamenters did not have the luxury of refusing a way. They went down. And it was in the underlevels, at the 3rd hour of the descent, that the Lamenters lost their first brother, and I want you to notice how he died. Because the manner of it is the whole point. Brother Halcyo, the pilot, the one who had held the failing Thunderhawk together long enough to save the district, was on the rear guard when a section of the tunnel roof gave way. Not blown, not brought down by the enemy. It simply failed, old rockcrete under a dying hive, the way the drift tunnel failed on the Salamander's world, the way things fail. And it came down across the column's rear, and it would have come down on a cluster of civilians, 30 or 40 of them, a whole knot of families bunched in the dark. And Brother Halcyo saw it start, and did the only thing there was to do, which was to get under it. He put himself beneath the falling roof, and he held it. An armored demigod with 100 tons of rockcrete coming down, and he held it long enough, just long enough, for the civilians to scramble clear, and Nerys' soul was close enough to hear him over the open channel. And what he said, in the last seconds, straining under a weight that was killing him, was not a war cry, and not a prayer. It was an apology. "Sorry," said Brother Halcyo, as 100 tons of a dying world came down on him. "Sorry, Sergeant. Clumsy. Get them clear." And then the roof finished falling, and Brother Halcyo was gone, and 31 civilians were alive who would not have been. And the Lamenters did not stop because they could not, because the clock was running. But Nerys saw the young one, Kaelin, standing at the edge of the fresh rubble for a moment too long, staring at it. And she saw Sergeant Sarael put a hand on the young one's shoulder plate and say something she could not hear. And she saw the young one shudder, once, hard, all through his armored body, and then turn away and keep moving. Nerys marked the crest, in that moment, for the first time. Really marked it, the bleeding heart on the breastplate, because Halcyo's death was the first time she saw one of them broken, and grief has a way of fixing your eye on small details. The heart on Kaelin's breastplate, worked in bronze, 3 drops of blood falling from it, was already, at the 8th hour, half obscured, caked with the grey scum of the flooded underlevels, streaked with the black ichor of the tide, and dented, a long gouge across it where something's talon had scored the metal. And Nerys thought, looking at it, of course it's a bleeding heart. Of course that's their sign. Not a fist, not a skull, not a beast. A heart, wounded, worn on the outside where everything can get at it. She thought it was the most honest heraldry she had ever seen, and the most defenseless, and she understood without being told that the Lamenters had chosen to wear their one great vulnerability openly on their chests, in bronze, where every enemy could aim at it, because hiding it would have been a kind of lie, and they did not lie, not even in the language of their armor. By the end of the day, every one of those bleeding hearts would be all but invisible, buried under mud and gore and dents, scored and blackened past reading. And Nerys came to think that this too was the truest thing about them, that they wore their wounded hearts on the outside, and let the world do to those hearts exactly what the world does, until you could barely tell there had been a heart there at all, only a battered patch of yellow where one used to be. The device degraded exactly as the men did, all day, in step, the sign and the thing it signified worn down together, and by the fields there was not one clean, bleeding heart left among them, only mud and dents, and the memory of what had been painted underneath. She did not understand what she had seen. She learned later. The hand on the shoulder was the sanguinary priest's work, the sergeant doing the priest's job because the priest was busy elsewhere. It was the thing they did to each other when the grief spiked, when a brother's death threatened to crack the door on the thing inside them, when the black rage stirred. Kaelin had loved Halcyon. Kaelin was young, and the young are closest to the curse, and for a moment in the dark under a dead world, Kaelin had felt the angel's death rise up in him, called by the death of a brother, and had come within a shudder of being lost. The first stroke had cost them a warrior. It had also, though Nerys could not see it yet, started the clock on a second and quieter countdown, the one inside the Lamenters themselves, the one that had nothing to do with the Navy or the Exterminatus, the one that had been ticking in their blood for 10,000 years. The underlevels were their own long nightmare, and I will give you only the shape of it, because the shape is what matters. They were the deep dark again, the kind every hive keeps in its roots, and the tide was in it, and moving 900 failing people through a lightless flooded warren with an enemy already inside it should have cost the column half its number. It did not, and the reason it did not is the reason the account keeps circling back to. The Lamenters spent themselves instead. They went first into every flooded gallery, chest deep in the black water, feeling for the drop-offs and the tide both, so that no civilian had to. They carried the ones who could not swim. When the water rose too high in one section, Brother Ostian stood in the deepest part of it, braced against the current, and made himself a bollard, a fixed point in the dark, that 800 people passed, hand over hand, along his outstretched arm, one at a time, for 40 minutes, an armored giant standing motionless in freezing black water, so that mortals would have something solid to hold in the dark. Nobody thanked him. There was no time and no breath. He would not have wanted it, and they lit their way with their own bodies. This is a small thing, and Nerys never forgot it. The Lamenter's armor runs hot, like all Astartes' plate, and in the pitch black of the underlevels, the civilians could not see at all. So the Lamenters spaced themselves along the column and opened their helms, let the dim red glow of their eye lenses and the faint heat shimmer of their exposed faces show just enough, just barely, so that 800 people, stumbling through absolute dark, had a series of dim, warm points to steer by. 9 faint lights in the black, strung out along a column of the doomed, each one a warrior who could have sealed his helm and seen perfectly, and chosen instead to show his face to the dark, so the people behind him would not be blind. Nerys steered by Sergeant Sariel's face for 2 hours in that warren, a dim, pale, grave glow ahead of her in the black, and she has said that of all the images she carried out of Cadmus, that is the one that comes to her most. following a sad man's face through the dark because he had uncovered it to be her lantern. They came up on the western side at the 8th hour, into the arterial road, with the fields 11 kilometers ahead, and 8 of them left, and the ash falling, and the tide song rising in the dark behind them. And Sergeant Sarail counted his people, 891 civilians, and 8 brothers, and said, "Move." And they moved, and for about an hour it went well, and Nerys let herself hope again. That is when the ammunition ran out, and they discovered what was in the resupply cache, and the universe played the cruelest joke it had yet found. Chapter 3. The Wrong Calibre. There was supposed to be a Munitorum cache at the Vaughn interchange. The Lamenters had known about it before they landed. It was on the district logistics manifest, one of the pre-positioned emergency supply points that a hive lays down against disorder. A hardened bunker with rations, water, medici supplies, and crucially, munitions. Bolter ammunition. And the Lamenters, who had lost their heavy reserve in the crash and had been fighting a running battle for 8 hours, were, by the time they reached the Vaughn interchange at the 9th hour, nearly dry. Ostian's heavy bolter had fallen silent 2 kilometers back. The others were counting rounds. A space marine without ammunition is still a nightmare. They had blades, they had chainswords, they had fists that could crush ceramite. But a nightmare that must close to arm's length to kill is a nightmare that takes wounds. And wounds for these men were not only wounds. Every drop of blood spilled was a drop closer to the thing in the blood. They reached the cache. It was intact. The blast door was sealed and undamaged, and the bunker behind it was full, exactly as the manifest promised. Floor to ceiling, crates and crates of it, and the column's spirits lifted, and Nerys felt the hope come up in 900 people, like a breath. And Brother Tavian, the veteran, broke open the first munitions crate and went still. Nerys was close. She saw the rounds. She did not know then what she was looking at. She knew only that Tavian, who had not reacted to 8 hours of horror, stood holding an open crate of ammunition and did not move for 3 full seconds, and then said, in a voice with something in it she had not heard from any of them, "Sergeant, it's the wrong caliber." And then he laughed. That is the part Nerys was not ready for. Brother Tavian, the veteran of 2 centuries, stood in a bunker full of ammunition he could not use, on a dying world, out of time, out of luck, and he laughed. A short, dry, disbelieving bark of a laugh, and he said to no one, to the universe, to whatever was doing this to them, "Of course it is. Of course it is. Why would it be anything else?" And the other Lamenters, checking crate after crate and finding the same thing in everyone, began, one by one, to laugh too. Not madness, not despair, but the specific terrible laughter of men who have been the punchline of a cosmic joke for 100 years, and have long since learned that the only alternative to laughing is something much worse. Nerys found the laughter more frightening than screaming would have been. She said so in the account, years later. She said that a bunker full of space marines laughing quietly at a crate of ammunition that would not fit their guns was the moment she finally, fully understood that these men were not unlucky the way a gambler is unlucky. They were haunted. Something followed them, and they knew it followed them, and they had been living in its shadow so long that when it reached out and did the impossible thing one more time, all they had left was to laugh at it, because laughing was the one response the curse could not take away from them. It could take their guns and their gunship and their brothers. It could not quite take their grim, battered humor. That was the last thing they owned, and they held onto it, in a bunker at the end of the world. and Neris' soul loved them so much in that moment that she thought her heart would stop. I have to explain this, because it is the single most important stroke of bad luck in the whole account, and it sounds, told plainly, like nothing. Bolter ammunition comes in patterns. The bolt is a self-propelled mass-reactive round, and the weapons are chambered to a standard. But there are variances, marks, patterns that have drifted across 10,000 years and 1,000,000 forge worlds, and the ammunition in the Vaughn cache was bolter ammunition, genuinely, correctly labeled, exactly what the manifest said. It was simply a pattern that would not chamber in the Lamenters' weapons, off by a fraction, a clerical matter, a forge world variance, a supply code that had been entered correctly by someone who had no way of knowing that the only Astartes who would ever draw on this cache would be carrying weapons from a different tradition entirely. Because the Lamenters forge and maintain their own war gear, as all the sons of Sanguinius do, to their own ancient marks. And the mass-produced Munitorum bolt pattern in that bunker was a hair too wide at the collar to seat in a Lamenter's chamber. A full Munitorum cache, thousands of rounds, and not one of them would fit their guns. Neris watched Sergeant Sarael pick up a single bolt round and try by hand to seat it in his bolter, and watched it stop, a millimeter proud, and watched him try again, gently. The way you try a key you already know is wrong, and set the round down, and stand there in the ash with his dead gunship and his dead brother and his 891 mortals, holding a weapon he could not feed in a bunker full of ammunition he could not use. And she watched a 200-year-old warrior of the Adeptus Astartes come for one moment, right to the edge of something, and then master it and turn and say to his brothers, in a voice scraped flat and level, "Blades, then. It was always going to be blades." A pause. Priest. A word. The sanguinary priest was called Rael, and I have not given him to you properly yet, and I must, because he is the axis the second half of this story turns on. Every squad of Sanguinius's sons carries one, a warrior surgeon, a keeper of the bloodline, whose sacred and terrible duty is to manage the curse. He carries the blood, a chem treatment, part gene seed, part sacrament, that calms the red thirst and holds back the black rage, administered to a brother when the priest judges he needs it. Rael had been doing his second job all day, the quiet job, moving up and down the column, not to fight but to watch his brother's vital signs on his narthecium, to watch for the flat effect and the fixed stare and the whispered name of the angel that meant a brother was starting to slip. And when Sarael called him aside at the Vaughn interchange, Neris was close enough to hear, and what she heard was the first time she understood that the Lamenters were fighting a second war the whole time, one she could not see. "How many doses?" said Sarael. "Enough," said Rael. "How many, Rael?" A silence. "4," said the priest. "4 doses of the blood. For 8 brothers, on a day like this, with what is coming." Another silence. "I have been rationing since the crash. Halcyon's death cost me more than Halcyon. Kalen nearly went in the tunnel. Ostian is grey. He has said nothing, but I have seen his readings, and he is grey, Sergeant. And every one of us is going to have to fight the rest of this at arm's length, in blood up to the elbow, because there are no bolts." Neris heard the priest's voice do something then, some small break in the professional flatness. 4 doses. I can hold 4 of us. The universe has decided which of us breaks by taking the guns. I did not think it could reach that far. I was wrong. It can always reach that far. That is when Neris' soul finally understood the thing the whole account had been trying to tell her, and it went through her like cold water. The bad luck was not a series of accidents. Or it was, each one was, individually, a real and explicable accident. A fuel line, a shield fault, a supply code. But the pattern was not an accident. The pattern was a siege, and the thing besieging them was not the tide and not the clock. It was the universe. It was the curse. And the curse was not content to kill the Lamenters with talons and fire, the honest way, the way a warrior can meet. It was killing them by taking away, one impossible coincidence at a time, every single thing that stood between these gentle men and the monster in their own blood. And it was doing it on purpose, or near enough to on purpose that the difference did not matter, and the Lamenters knew it, and had known it for 100 years, and had come anyway. Before they left the cache, Sariel did a thing that Nerys put near the center of everything she understood about him afterward. He had the column take the cache's rations and water. That was sense, they needed it. And then, as they were leaving, he stopped and went back. And from the useless munitions he took a single crate, and he broke it down, and he distributed the bolts, one each, to the mortals nearest him, pressing the fat brass rounds into their hands. Nerys asked him why. She had earned the right to ask him things by then. "Because they will not seat in our guns," said Sariel, "but they are still bolts, and a bolt is a heavy hard thing, and if it comes to it, a frightened person with a heavy hard thing in their fist is better off than a frightened person with an empty hand." He pressed one into Nerys's palm too. She did not know then that this was a different round from the one Tavian would give her later. This was a useless one, a Munitorum one, and she carried both to her grave and could tell them apart by feel in the dark. "And because," he added quieter, "my brothers and I have carried a great many things all day that did us no good. It seemed wrong to leave a bunker full of the stuff and give none of it away. Even bad luck can be shared out. It weighs less, split up." That was Lamenter humor again, the grief humor, the joke that is not quite a joke, and Nerys did not laugh, but she understood that he had meant it partly seriously, that these men had made a whole philosophy out of carrying things that did no good, and that the philosophy was the only thing holding them together, and that they knew it, and made small, dark jokes about it, the way people do about the disease that is going to kill them. They fought the next 6 kilometers with blades, and they were, again, magnificent, and it cost them terribly. The fighting with blades was a different thing to watch, and Nerys has struggled her whole life to make people understand it, because it looked, to a mortal eye, like the Lamenters had become more dangerous, not less. A bolter fights at a distance. It is clean, mechanical, a matter of angles and suppression. A blade is intimate. When the Lamenters ran out of bolts and drew their chainswords and their combat knives, and in Ostian's case, a great two-handed chain axe, they stopped fighting like soldiers and started fighting like something older. And the tide, which had been dying at range, now had to be met hand to hand, and the Lamenters met it. And Nerys watched sons of the angel wade into a living flood of talon and chitin with blades, and open the enemy apart in a spray of ichor that painted their yellow armor black to the elbow. And that was the trap inside the trap, the one Rael had named at the cache. Every kill at Blade's Reach was a kill made in a fountain of blood, and blood is the thing. For these men, of all the warriors in the galaxy, blood is the thing. The red thirst rises on the smell of it, on the heat of it, on the intimacy of killing close enough to be bathed in what you kill. And the curse, having taken their guns, had forced them into precisely the kind of fighting most likely to wake the thing in their blood. It was not enough for the universe to make them kill with blades. It made them kill with blades, because blade killing is what stirs the rage. So that every meter of the march west was not only costing them wounds and time, but actively feeding the second, inner enemy. The one Rael was running out of medicine to fight. The wrong caliber ammunition was not one stroke of bad luck. It was two, braided together. It stripped their reach, and it fed their curse with a single supply code error, and Neris came to believe that whatever aimed the Lamenters' misfortune understood them intimately, knew exactly which small accident would do the most compound harm, and chose it. Brother Cale, the quiet one, died at the 10th hour, and he died because his chainsword, old like everything they owned, maintained like everything they owned, threw its chain mid-swing, a mechanical failure of a part he had checked that morning, at the precise instant he was committed to a killing stroke against a bioform that a working blade would have bisected. The dead weapon left him open for the half-second it takes, and the tide does not waste half-seconds, and Cale went down under 3 of them, and Tavian and Kalen cut him free and killed the things that had killed him, but Cale was gone. His chainsword was recovered afterward and examined, and the fault was found, and it was, the tech priest said, a 1 in 1,000 failure of a drive cog, the kind of thing that simply happens, occasionally, to someone. Neris fought too, in that 6th kilometer, and I want it recorded, not because she was any use, she was not. A records adjutant with a knife against a hive fleet is not a combatant, but because of what it taught her about them. A bioform came around Brother Tavian's flank, in the confusion when Cale went down, and it came at the mortals, at a cluster of them that included 2 children, and Neris was the nearest thing to it that could move, and she did the stupid, brave, pointless thing, the Hesh thing, the thing the doomed do, and she put herself in front of the children with her useless knife. She should have died. She has always known she should have died in that second. What happened instead was that Brother Tavian, who was 11 meters away and fully engaged and had no possible way to reach her in time, reached her in time, crossed 11 meters of chaos and killed the thing, a handspan from her face, and was gone again before she had finished flinching. And as he passed in the half-second, without stopping, the veteran said one word to her, and the word was, "Don't." Not thank you for trying, not well done. Just don't. Do not do that. Do not put yourself in front of the thing. Do not make me choose between reaching you and holding the line. Do not add your death to the weight I am already failing to carry. And Neris understood, standing there shaking with her useless knife, that even her courage was a burden to them, that the kindest thing she could do for these men was to stay alive and let herself be saved, and that this was perhaps the hardest thing they asked of anyone, not to help them, to simply be worth saving and to survive and to let them spend themselves and not to try to share the cost, because the cost was theirs and they had chosen it, and the one way to make it meaningless was to die cheaply beside them. It always happened to them. That was the curse. It was not that terrible things happened. Terrible things happen to everyone. It was that the 1 in 1,000 failure, the 1 in 10,000 fault, the freak, the fluke, the statistical impossibility, it found the Lamenters every single time at the worst possible moment, as though the dice of the universe had been weighted against these specific men, and Neris' soul stopped, somewhere in that 6th kilometer, being able to tell herself it was chance. She started to feel it then. This is the part that is hardest to convey, and the part that makes it horror rather than tragedy. She started to feel the curse as a presence, not a metaphor, not a run of bad numbers, but a thing in the air around the Lamenters, an attention, a weight, a sense that when you stood near them the world tilted very slightly toward the worst outcome, that the dice were being watched by something that did not wish them well. She caught herself once in that 6th kilometer, drifting a few meters away from Sergeant Sarail without deciding to, the way you drift from a man you have been told is bad luck. And she caught herself doing it, and was ashamed, and made herself walk back, and saw him notice, and saw him understand exactly what she had done and why, and saw him not hold it against her even slightly, because 100 years of everyone doing exactly that had worn the hurt of it smooth. He was used to being flinched away from. That was almost the worst thing she learned about them. They were the kindest beings she ever met, and they were used to being avoided, and they had made their peace with it, and they kept being kind. Cale's death changed the column, and not in the way you would expect, and it is worth telling, because it is the moment the mortals of Cadmus started to become something more than cargo. They had watched the Lamenters die twice now, Halcyo in the tunnel, Cale on the road, and something shifted in 840 terrified people, some slow turning of the collective heart. They had begun the march as the rescued, passive, herded, grateful and afraid. But you cannot watch demigods bleed and die for you, over and over, and stay passive. It does something to you. It puts a weight on you. And the people of the 4th District began, without anyone organizing it, to try to carry their share. The strong began carrying the weak, so the Lamenters would not have to. Men who had a little fight in them took up the dead's fallen gear. Cale's cracked combat knife went to a rig hand, who had no idea how to use it, and carried it anyway, at the column's edge, because a Lamenter had died there, and someone felt they ought to stand where he had stood. Neris organized it, in the end, because organizing was what she was for. She made the able-bodied into a rough screen around the failing, so that the Lamenters had fewer gaps to plug, fewer bodies to shield, and the column began, for the first time, to help hold itself together. It did not save any Lamenters. Nothing was going to save the Lamenters. The account had been written before they landed, but it mattered, and it mattered to them. Neris saw it. She saw Sergeant Sarael notice the mortals closing their own ranks, taking up the dead's blades, trying, uselessly and bravely, to share the weight, and she saw something move in his grave face that she had not seen there before, and she asked him about it later, and he said, "In 100 years, Adjutant, the people we die for have almost never tried to help us. They run, or they freeze, or they cannot, and we do not blame them. It is not their place. Yours are trying." He looked out over the ragged column with its improvised screen of frightened people carrying dead men's knives. It will not change the count, but it means that when we fall among people who were with us, and not merely people we were carrying. My brothers and I have not had that in a very long time. Thank you for it. It is more than you know. 7 of them now, and at the 11th hour, with the field 6 kilometers ahead, and the clock at 17 hours, and the column down to 840. Brother Ostian, the big one, the heavy weapons brother, the one the priest had called Grey, stopped in the middle of the arterial road, and stood, and did not move. And when Calen went to him and said his name, Ostian turned, and Neris saw his face through his open helm, and it was wrong. The eyes were fixed on something a long way off and a long time ago, and Ostian said, in a voice of terrible, dawning, exalted grief, to no one, to a ghost, to a battle that had ended 10,000 years before he was born. My Lord Sanguinius, they are all around us. Hold, my Lord, I am with you. Priest, Sarael's voice cracked across the channel. Priest, Ostian is going... But the priest had 4 doses, and he had spent them by the reckoning only he could make. And Neris understood from the stricken silence on the channel that Ostian was not one of the 4. There had not been enough. The universe had taken the guns to make sure there would not be enough. There was a moment, just before, right at the edge of it, when Ostian was still there. When the great warrior stood swaying with the angel's death rising in him, and his face wrong, and Rael reached him, and got both hands on his pauldrons, and put their helms together, and said, low and fast and desperate, Ostian, brother, stay, look at me, stay with me, count your breathing. You are Ostian, you are on Cadmus, the year is... And for 1 second, one terrible second, Ostian's eyes cleared, and he looked at Rael, and he knew him, and he knew where he was, and he knew what was happening to him. And Nerys saw a fully aware man understand, in real time, that he was about to be taken, that the door was opening, and there was no blood left to shut it, that he had perhaps 10 more seconds of being himself, and Ostian used the 10 seconds to say goodbye. He said, Nerys heard it on the open channel, and she gave it to the scribe word for word, and it is the thing about the whole day she found hardest to speak aloud. He said, it's all right, Rael. It's all right. Don't spend it on me. There isn't enough. Save it for Kalen. He's younger. He's got more left to give them. I'll aim it at the enemy. I promise you, brother, I'll aim it. And then his eyes changed, mid-word, the man going out like a lamp, and where Ostian had been there was only the angel's grief, 10,000 years old, and it threw back its head and screamed the name of Sanguinius, and the black rage took him, and kind Ostian, who had carried a child so gently it fell asleep, was gone, but he had aimed it. That is the thing Rael clung to, afterward, and that Nerys clings to still. In his last 10 seconds of being himself, Ostian had chosen, had refused the blood so that Kalen might have it, had turned himself deliberately toward the enemy, had made his own damnation into a shield with the very last of his mind. Whether any of that intention survived into the rage, whether the thing that went into the tide was still aiming or only happened to be pointed the right way, no one will ever know. But he meant to. That much is certain. That much the channel recorded. In the last moment he could still choose anything. A gentle giant chose to point his own doom away from the people he loved, and that choice is the truest thing in this entire account, and it will never be written anywhere but here. Chapter 4. The Thing in the Blood. What the Black Rage does is the worst horror in this story, and it is worse than the tide, and I have held it until now on purpose, because you had to love them first. When it takes a son of Sanguinius, he does not simply go mad. He goes elsewhere. He relives as though it were happening to him, in that moment, the death of the angel. The last hour aboard Horus's flagship, 10,000 years ago, when Sanguinius stood alone against the War Master and knew he could not win and fought anyway to buy the Emperor the seconds he needed. The afflicted brother believes he is Sanguinius. He believes the enemies around him are the traitor legions. He believes the friends around him, his own brothers, the mortals he was shielding, are at best not there, and at worst the enemy. And he fights with the full, unbound, berserk fury of a demigod who has stopped managing the thirst and stopped fearing death and stopped entirely being able to tell the people he loves from the things he hates. Ostian went into the tide. That is the one mercy of what happened, and it is a horror in its own right. He was at the rear when he broke, and the tide was at the rear. And so when the Black Rage took him, he turned toward the enemy and not toward the column. And he went into the Tyrannid swarm like a yellow comet, alone, on foot, with a chain axe, screaming the name of a dead angel. And he did not stop. Nerys watched him go, watched him carve into a tide that should have killed him in seconds and did not. Because there is nothing in the galaxy harder to kill than a son of Sanguinius who has stopped wanting to live. and she watched the swarm's whole attention on the column's rear turn, drawn to the roaring, berserk thing in their midst. And she understood, sickened, that Ostian's madness had just bought the column its cleanest hour of the whole march. There was a moment, right at the start of it, that Nerys has never been able to decide the meaning of, and I give it to you to decide for yourself, because she never could. As Ostian turned toward the tide, and the last of the man went out of him, he looked back, once, at the column, at the mortals, at the child he had carried on his back that afternoon, who was near the middle of the column, asleep against its mother's shoulder. He looked back at that child for perhaps half a second, and then he turned and went into the swarm and did not look back again. Rael saw it too, and Nerys asked him later what it meant, whether some part of Ostian, under the rage, had still known the child, had turned toward the enemy because of the child, had aimed his own madness away from the people he loved with the very last scrap of himself. And the priest was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "I would like to believe that. I have wanted to believe that about a great many of my brothers over 200 years." And he did not say anything else, and Nerys understood that he did not know either, that no one knows, that it is the central cruelty of the Black Rage, that you can never tell whether the man is still in there aiming, or whether it is only the swarm that happened to be the nearest thing to hit, and that the Lamenters carry that not knowing about every brother they have ever lost to it, forever, and choose, because they are who they are, to believe the kinder version, without evidence, as an act of love. He killed for a long time. The channel carried it, not his voice. He had no words left, only the sounds of it. And the sounds of a space marine berserk in a swarm are not sounds I will describe. And the column moved, fast, west, away, while the thing that had been kind Ostian held the entire rear of a hive fleet's attention by himself. And the last anyone heard of him was a long time after they should have been out of range, which meant he was still alive, still fighting, still somewhere back there in the ash being torn apart and not dying. And Sergeant Sarael took his helm off as they moved. Nerys saw it, and looked back once and said something that the channel did not catch, and put the helm back on. "He'll fight until there's nothing left," said a voice beside Nerys, and it was the priest, Rael, who had fallen back to walk with the mortals, and whose face, when Nerys looked, was a ruin of a particular kind she had no name for. That is the rage. It does not let you die while there is an enemy in reach. It is the angel's death, and the angel did not get to stop, so neither do they. Ostian will fight back there for hours, perhaps a day, alone, believing to the very end that he is dying at his father's side, on the worst day of the Imperium's life, 10,000 years ago. The priest looked at her. "That is what we are, Adjutant. Under the courtesy. That is what waits in all of us. I spend my life holding that door shut for my brothers, and today, the universe took my hands away from it, 4 doses at a time, and I have to watch them go in one by one, and choose which ones I cannot save." The priest kept talking as they moved, and Nerys understood he needed to. That a man who has spent the day cutting the mercy into his own brothers' skulls needs somewhere to put it, and that she was the somewhere because she was the only one who would still be alive to remember. So she listened, and she has given the account most of what he said, and it is the closest anyone has ever come to hearing a sanguinary priest of a cursed chapter speak plainly about the thing he guards. "People think it is a battle fury," Rael said. "The rage. They think it makes us stronger, and it does, and they think that is the point of it, and it is not. The point of it." He was quiet a moment, killing a bioform almost absently as it came at the column. A backhand blow not breaking stride. The point of it is that it is grief. It is the oldest grief there is. Our father died 10,000 years ago, and we have never been allowed to stop grieving him, because his death is written into us, into the blood, and under enough pain it rises up and swallows the man whole. We do not go berserk, Adjutant. We go back. We go back to the worst day, and we fight it again, and we lose it again, forever. He looked down at her. Do you understand what that means about my brothers? Every one of them, at the end, dies believing he is somewhere else, in someone else's body, on the worst day of a war that ended before the Imperium you were born into existed. They do not even get to die as themselves. The curse takes that too. It takes the man and gives back the angel's last hour, on loop, until the body finally fails. His voice was very steady, which was how she knew how much it cost. I have held that door for 200 years. Today I ran out of the thing that holds it. Do you know what it is? To spend your whole life keeping the people you love from a fate worse than death, and then to run out on the one day it matters most because of a fuel line and a shield and a bad supply code. That is my curse, Adjutant, not the rage. The rage I could fight. It is watching the small, stupid accidents line up, one after another, each one taking away a tool I needed, until I have nothing left in my hands, and my brothers start to sing. Neris did not know what to say to that. There is nothing to say to that. She reached up. She was a records adjutant. She was 34. She came up to the middle of his chest, and she put her hand on his filthy yellow vambrace, on the muck and the blood and the dents, and she said the only thing there was, which was, "Thank you. Thank you for coming. We know you didn't have to. We know." And the sanguinary priest Rael, keeper of the blood, looked down at a small woman thanking him on the worst day of his own long life, and said, "That is the first time in 100 years anyone has said that to us." And then, because he was what he was, "Keep them moving, Adjutant. We are so close. Do not let them stop." They were close. That is the thing. Everything I have told you, all of it. The crash and the shield and the tunnel and the guns and Ostian. All of it. And they were still, at the 14th hour, only 4 kilometers from the Salvation Fields, with 830 souls, and 6 brothers, and 13 hours on the clock, and a real, genuine, mathematical chance of making it. That is what the curse does. It does not simply defeat you. It keeps you alive, and hoping, right to the edge, so that the final blow lands on a heart that had let itself believe. I am doing it to you now, deliberately, because it was done to them. They were going to make it. At the 14th hour, they were going to make it. Then the Navy moved the clock. It came over the command channel, the one Sarael monitored, and the mortals could not hear. And Neris only knew because she was watching the sergeant's back when it arrived, and she saw him stop. The exterminatus had been advanced. The Hive Fleet's main body was translating in faster than projected. The tendril consuming Cadmus was only ever the vanguard, and the true swarm was coming, and the Navy, doing its own cold correct arithmetic, had decided it could not wait, that every hour it stayed, risked the ships that would fight the fleet at 100 other worlds. The last lifter would not lift at the 28th hour. It would lift at the 18th. They had not 13 hours. They had 4. And the fields were 4 kilometers away, 4 kilometers of ruined arterial with the tide thickening. And the math that had been thin but possible was now, suddenly, simply impossible. 4 kilometers, that terrain, that column in 4 hours, could not be done. And every soul who understood the numbers understood in the same instant that the schedule had just killed them all. Neris understood the numbers. That was her curse in a small way. She was the one mortal in the column who could do the arithmetic as fast as the sergeant. because arithmetic was her whole trade, and so she was the one mortal who knew, the moment the Navy's message came through, that they were dead. She stood in the ash with the tally in her head. 4 kilometers, 4 hours, 830 people. A fighting withdrawal against a thickening swarm. And she watched the answer come out the same no matter how she ran it. And she felt the thing she had been holding off for 2 days finally arrive. The despair, the bottom of it, the understanding that all of it, the tunnel and the wall and the guns and the brothers, all of it had been for nothing. That they had come so far, only to lose the race. By a margin the universe had reached in and adjusted at the last possible moment purely, it seemed, to be cruel. And she looked at Sarael, and she saw that he had done the same arithmetic and gotten the same answer. And she waited for him to break, or to lie, or to do the thing the numbers demanded, which was to abandon the slow and run with the fast and salvage what could be salvaged. And instead she watched him become very still and very calm, the calm she had learned to dread. And she understood that he had found a fourth term in the equation that she had not thought to include, because she was a clerk and he was a warrior, and the term was the 6 of them. She had been solving the problem as 830 people. 4 kilometers, 4 hours. Sarael was solving it as 830 people, 4 kilometers, 4 hours, and 6 lives to spend. And with 6 Astartes lives added to the ledger as a resource to be expended, rather than a thing to be preserved, the impossible equation had a solution after all. An obscene one, a grief-shaped one, but a real one. And Nerys watched Sergeant Sarael find it, and accept it, and turn to give the orders that would spend his brothers and himself down to the last drop to buy a margin the universe had stolen. And she understood in that moment the whole terrible economy of the Lamenters, that they were the one force in the galaxy that would, without hesitation, enter their own lives on the wrong side of the ledger to make a hopeless sum come right, and that they had been doing it for 100 years, and that this is why there are almost none of them left, and this is why they came, and this is why they die, and this is why, in 800 years, there will be no Lamenters at all, because a chapter that solves every impossible equation by spending itself will eventually run out of itself to spend, and they know it, and they do it anyway, world after world, until there is nothing left of them but a story a record's adjutant tells to a scribe who does not quite believe her. And she watched him do the thing that makes him, of all the noble doomed men in this account, the one she could never speak of without stopping. She watched him decide not to tell the column, and instead to make the impossible number possible the only way it could be made possible, which was to spend the one resource he had left that could buy time, himself, them, the 6. He called his brothers in, and he gave them the arithmetic on the private channel, and Nerys did not hear it, but she saw its shape in what happened next, and Rael told her the rest, later, at the very end. The column could not make 4 kilometers in 4 hours while fighting, but the column could make 4 kilometers in 4 hours if it did not have to fight. If something else drew the tide, held the tide, occupied the tide every meter of the way, so that 830 people could simply run. 6 Space Marines could not carry 800 people to safety, but 6 Space Marines could become a wall between 800 people and the dark, and move that wall, and bleed it thinner with every kilometer. And if the wall lasted just exactly long enough, the people behind it would reach the light. Nerys has been asked over the years, by the few who believed her, why the Lamenters did not simply take the fastest of the column and run, save the strong, make the fields with time to spare, accept the loss of the slow. It is the question every strategist asks, and it is the question the whole Imperium is built on answering yes to, And the answer is the reason the Lamenters are the Lamenters, and not any other chapter. They could not, would not, could not. The way you cannot make yourself stop grieving on command. Sariel explained it to her once, in the 14th hour, when she asked him herself, because by then she was doing the arithmetic too, and part of her, God help her, wanted him to leave the slow ones and save the rest and save himself. And he said, "If I leave the slow ones, Adjutant, then I have decided that some of the people who asked me for help are worth less than others, and I have become the schedule that abandoned your district in the first place, and there is then no difference between me and the thing I crossed the stars to defy. And if there is no difference, then there was no reason to come, and my brothers are dying for nothing, and the whole of what we are is a lie." He was quiet a moment. "We are not brave, Adjutant. I keep telling you this, and you keep not believing it. We are simply unable to become the other thing. It is not strength. It is that the door to the other thing is shut in us, welded, the way the Western Wall was welded. And unlike the wall, ours will not open, not for sense, not for survival, not for anything. We will die of it eventually. We have nearly died of it 100 times. We would rather." They split the difference between duty and doom the way the Lamenters always have. 3 brothers, Tavian, the veteran, and 2 others, Zadiel and Iael, whom I have not named because Neris never really got to know them, because they died too fast. 3 brothers fell back to become the rear wall, the anvil, the thing that would hold the tide's whole weight, and be ground away doing it. And 3, Sariel, the priest Rael, and the young one Kaelin, stayed with the column, to drive it, to shield it, to get 830 people the last 4 kilometers, while their brothers died behind them buying the road. There was no argument this time. That is the detail Neris marked, having watched them from the start. On the first night, the Lamenters had discussed things, debated, the sergeant consulting his brothers the way she consulted her manifests. By the 15th hour, there was none of that left. Sariel gave the arithmetic, and the 3 who were to die simply stepped back out of the column, and the 3 who were to live simply stayed, and the whole thing took perhaps 10 seconds, and not one word of protest, and Neris understood that this was not discipline, and it was not despair. It was practice. These men had made this exact division of themselves. Who dies to buy the road, who lives to carry the load. So many times over 100 years that it had worn down to a look and a nod. They knew how to do this. They were, God help them, good at it, in the way you become good at the thing that is killing you. And there was a terrible tired grace in how smoothly 6 men sorted themselves into the dying and the living with the ash falling and the clock running. And they said goodbye to each other the way Neris imagined old married people say goodbye. Barely, with almost nothing. Because everything had already been said so many times, it no longer needed saying. Tavian put his forehead against Sariel's, helm to helm, for 1 second. That was all. 200 years, and 1 second of helm against helm, and then the veteran turned east. Neris, watching, thought of her own father, who had died in a hab fire when she was 19, and of how little she had said to him, and how she had always thought there would be time, and she understood that the Lamenters had learned the thing she learned at 19, and had learned it so many times that they no longer needed the words, and that this was not coldness, it was the opposite. It was a love so worn and so certain that it had stopped needing to announce itself. Neris found Tavian before he fell back. She did not plan to. He found her, the old veteran, and he crouched down. They all crouched, always, to speak to her, every one of them, to the very end. And he pressed something into her hands. It was small and heavy, and it was a bolt round, a single bolt round, one of theirs, one that fit, one of the last from before the crash. "For luck," said Brother Tavian, the veteran of 200 years. And Neris heard the smile in it, and also the thing under the smile. "It's a joke, Adjutant. Lamenter humor. We give each other these. Ours don't work, you see. Our luck." He closed her small hands around the round with his enormous ones. "Gently, gently. Give it to the sergeant when you reach the fields. Tell him Tavian says the account is closed and it balances. He'll know what it means." He stood. "Run fast, Adjutant Soul. Don't look back. We're not worth looking back at. We're just doing the only thing we were ever any good at." And then the old man turned and walked east, into the dark, toward the tide, with two brothers beside him. And Neris' soul did look back, once, because she could not help it, and she saw three filthy yellow figures, with bleeding hearts on their breasts, set themselves across the road against an ocean, and then the ash closed over them, and she never saw any of the three again. They heard the rearguard die over the channel, over the next hour, and Sariel did not silence it, and Neris came to believe he left it open on purpose, that he made himself and his two remaining brothers listen to Tavian and Zadiel and Iael being ground away behind them, because to mute it would have been to look away, and the Lamenters do not look away, not from the tide, not from the dark, not from the deaths of their own. It was not dramatic. That is what Neris remembered. Three warriors holding a road against a hive fleet, and what came over the channel was mostly silence and breathing, and the occasional flat word of a man reporting his situation to brothers who could do nothing about it. Iael went first, and the only sign of it was Tavian's voice saying, "Iael's down," and then, a moment later, "He's up, he's down. Hold the line, Zadiel." Zadiel lasted longer, and at the end there was only Tavian, the veteran, 200 years old, alone on a road in the ash, with the whole weight of the tide on him. And he did not scream, and he did not fall to the rage, and he did not pray. What Tavian did, at the very end, alone, was talk to them, to Sariel, to Rael, to the brothers ahead, in a calm conversational voice, about ordinary things, about the column, about whether they had made the interchange yet, keeping them company while he died, so that the sound in their helms as they ran would be his voice, and not the tide. "Keep them moving," he said, over and over, between the wet impacts. "Don't you dare stop to grieve me, I'll haunt you. Keep them moving. How far now? Good. Good. That's good." And then, at the very last, when the tide was on him, and there were perhaps seconds left, the old veteran of the cursed 21st said one more thing, and it was to Neris, though she did not expect it, though she had thought he had forgotten she was on the channel. "Adjutant Soul, that round I gave you, don't lose it. It's important. Tell the sergeant." And then the channel filled with a sound, and then the channel went quiet, and Neris never heard the end of the sentence, and she has spent 41 years wondering what the round was supposed to tell the sergeant, and I will tell you now that she never found out, because some things the dark takes and does not give back, and that is part of the horror too, the small unfinished things, the sentences that end in static. Three brothers now with the column. Kaelin, who was young and close to the edge. Rael, who was out of the blood. And Sariel, who had 4 kilometers and 4 hours and 830 people, and a bolt round he did not yet know was waiting for him, and who said on the open channel to 830 terrified mortals, in a voice that gave away nothing of the arithmetic, "We are very close now. I need you to run. I know you are tired, I know. Run anyway, and we will be behind you the whole way. And I promise you, the road ahead is open." It was not open. He knew it was not open. It was the only lie Sergeant Sariel told in the entire account. and he told it to make 830 people run toward a fighting chance instead of lying down in the ash. And it was the kindest lie Neris' soul ever heard, and it worked. They ran. Chapter 5. The Lament. They lost Kalen at the 2nd kilometer, and they lost him to the thing inside. And it was the death Neris could least bear because it was the one the universe did not even have to arrange. It simply let the boy's own blood do the work. Kalen had been holding. Through Halcyo, through Kale, through Ostian, through the three who walked east, the youngest Lamenter had held the door in himself shut by will alone, because the priest had no blood left to help him, and he had done it for 14 hours. And he was, by any measure that matters, the bravest of all of them, because the others fought an enemy they could see, and Kalen fought the one in his own skull, with nothing but his own grief pressing the door open from the other side. And at the 2nd kilometer, running, with the fields almost in sight, a knot of bioforms broke through onto the column's flank and reached the mortals. Reached a cluster of them, took 3, took a woman and her 2 children in front of the whole running crowd. And Kalen, who had held through everything, saw children die, and the door came open. But Kalen was not at the rear. Kalen was in the middle of the column among the mortals when the rage took him. Neris saw it. She was 10 meters away. She saw the young warrior stop and shudder. That same full-body shudder she had seen in the tunnel. And she saw his face change. Saw the person go out of it, and the 10,000-year-old battle come into it. And she saw him raise his blade, and for one endless frozen instant, Neris' soul looked at a berserk son of Sanguinius, standing in the middle of 800 defenseless people, a warrior who could no longer tell them from the enemy, who believed with his whole shattered mind that he stood on the deck of the Warmaster's ship at the end of the world. And she understood that the next thing that happened would be a massacre, and that the Lamenter's curse had finally, at the very end, found the cruelest possible shape. It was going to make one of these gentle men kill the very people he had died to save, and Rael reached him first. The priest had been running with the column, and he was not close enough. No one was close enough, except that the priest had spent the whole day watching for exactly this, and he was moving before Kalen's blade was up, and he hit the young warrior bodily and got one arm around him and drove the Narthesium's blade. Not the blood, there was no blood, damned, but the other thing a sanguinary priest carries, the thing they do not speak of, into the base of Kalen's skull, the mercy, the thing you do for a brother who has gone past the door and cannot be brought back, so that he dies himself instead of living as the thing that kills what he loves. I want to stop the whole account here, on this one act, because it is the hinge of the entire story, and if you pass over it quickly, you will miss what the Lamenters actually are. Consider what Rael did, and what it cost, and what it means. A sanguinary priest's whole existence is the preservation of the bloodline, the gene seed, the blood, the sacred inheritance of Sanguinius carried forward through his sons. To kill a battle brother is, for a priest, close to the deepest sin available to him. And Rael, in the middle of a running battle, with his own hands, drove a blade into the skull of the youngest of his brothers, a boy he had watched over all day, a boy who had done nothing wrong, a boy whose only failure was to love children too much to watch them die. Because that death, given by a brother's hand, was cleaner than the alternative, which was Kalen living for another few minutes as a thing that murdered the people he had come to save. And Rael took the sin of it onto himself, out loud, in the boy's dying ear. The sin is mine and I take it gladly, so that Kalen would not go into death believing he had fallen, believing he had failed, believing he had become the monster. That is what a sanguinary priest of the Lamenters does with the worst moment of his life. He uses it to give his dying brother the gift of a clean conscience and keeps the guilt for himself, because he judged, in the half-second he had, that the boy needed the mercy more than he did. There is no devotional plate of that. There is no hymn about it. It happened in the ash, in front of one records adjutant who did not fully understand it, and it is one of the most purely selfless things a human being, and they are, whatever else they are, still human, still men, has ever done, and it will never be recorded anywhere except here, in a story most people will not believe. Kalen went down, and Rael held him as he went, the way you would hold anyone, and Nerys heard the priest say, into the dying boy's ear, on the open channel, the words she has carried for the rest of her life. You held longer than any of us would have. You held for the children. Rest now, brother. You did not fall. I promise you before the angel you did not fall. I stopped you, it was me. The sin is mine and I take it gladly. Rest. And then Kalen was still, and the priest knelt over him for exactly 1 second, in the middle of a running massacre, and then stood up with the young warrior's blood on his hands and said to the column, in a voice like a door closing, "Run. Do not look at this. Run." 2 of them now, Sarael and Rael, and the fields at last, in sight, the Salvation Fields, a great cracked apron of rockcrete a kilometer ahead, and on it, through the ash, the shape of the last Navy lifter, engines already lit, ramp already up on one side, a Munitorum officer's voice on the channel now, cold and clipped, counting down the minutes to lift, and 820 people found some last thing in themselves and ran for it across the final kilometer with 2 yellow-armored giants driving them on. They almost made it clean. That is the phrase Nerys used, years later, and then she stopped, because there is no clean. Not for these men, the universe was not finished. The orbital strike came down on the fields. It was not the exterminatus. The exterminatus was still an hour out. It was a single lance strike from a single Navy escort in low orbit, and it was aimed. This is the detail. This is the last and worst stroke. This is the curse's final signature. It was aimed at a Tyranid concentration 2 kilometers north of the fields. A legitimate target, a good call, a competent officer doing his job well. And the targeting solution was corrupted in transmission. A single character in the target code flipped in the Vox relay by atmospheric interference from the dying world's own death throes. A 1 in a million transcription fault of exactly the kind that finds the Lamenters, and only the Lamenters, and the lance strike, a spear of light that could crack a hive spire, came down not on the swarm to the north, but on the eastern edge of the Salvation Fields, 300 meters from the running column, from their own side, from an ally, from the sky. It did not hit the people. That is the one thing. It hit the eastern edge, and the shockwave threw 800 people flat, and burst eardrums, and cracked bone. But it did not hit the crowd. It hit the ground between the crowd and the tide that had been about to reach them, and it opened a wall of fire and molten rockcrete across the eastern approach, and in doing so it did, by pure blind accident, the one thing that saved them. It sealed the tide off from the fields for the 2 minutes the lifter needed. An Allied strike sent by mistake that should have killed them, that saved them instead, by accident, while wounding half of them. That is the Lamenter's luck rendered whole, in a single stroke, at the very end. Even the mercy came as a catastrophe, and even the catastrophe was, in the final accounting, a mercy. And there is no untangling the two, and there never was, for 100 years, for any of them. Sarael got them up. Nerys does not remember how. She remembers being on the ground with her ears full of blood, and the world silent and ringing. And then she remembers an enormous yellow hand closing gently around her arm and lifting her as though she weighed nothing, and the sergeant's face close to hers, his helm gone, saying words she could not hear through the ringing. And she remembers reading his lips, and his lips said, "Up, up, nearly there, up." And she got up, and 800 people got up, dragged up by 2 lamenters moving through them, and they crossed the last 300 meters to the lifter over ground that was on fire, and the ramp came down, and the Munitorum officer was screaming about weight limits and lift windows. And the lamenters put 811 human beings onto a Navy lifter in 90 seconds, physically, throwing them aboard when they had to, and did not board it themselves. Of course they did not board it themselves. You knew they would not. The lifter was rated for its load, and its load was the mortals, and there was the tide coming back around the firewall now, thousands of them, drawn to the engines and the crowd. And if the lifter was to reach liftoff, someone had to hold the ramp approach for the 90 seconds of spool up, and there were 2 of them, and they were what they were. Neris was at the top of the ramp when it happened, because she was the last one on, because she had counted every soul aboard the way she had counted them for 2 days. 811, her final manifest, the only tally of her life that ever mattered. And she turned at the top of the ramp and she looked back, because Tavian had told her not to, and she could not obey him. And she saw the last 2 lamenters of the cursed 21st set themselves at the foot of the ramp against the returning tide. Sariel and Rael, filthy yellow, the bleeding hearts on their breasts caked in mud and blood and dented half to ruin, the black and yellow checker on their shoulders barely visible under the grime of a dead world. 2 men out of 9, out of a chapter that had been dying for 100 years, standing between a swarm and a ramp, buying 90 seconds for 811 people whose names they had never learned and would never learn. And Rael went into the rage. He did it on purpose. That is the last horror and the last grace, and Neris understood it only because she saw Sariel's face when it happened, saw the sergeant look at the priest, and saw something pass between them, and saw the priest, the keeper of the blood, the man who had spent his whole life holding the door shut in others, deliberately, with a kind of terrible relief, let go of his own door, because the rage does not let a son of Sanguinius die while an enemy is in reach, because a brother lost to the black rage is worth more, in the last 90 seconds, than a brother in his right mind. He is unkillable, tireless, a demigod who has stopped being able to fall. Rael gave himself to the thing he had fought his whole life, at the end, as his last gift, so that he would last long enough to hold the ramp, and he threw back his head, and screamed the name of the angel, and went into the tide a berserk god, and the swarm broke over him, and could not pull him down. And Sariel stood beside his last brother, still himself, still Sariel, still choosing it in his right mind, with full knowledge of what it was. And that is the one that Neris could never forgive the universe for, that at the very end, the sergeant did not get the mercy of madness, that he held the ramp sane, knowing every second exactly where he was and what he was doing, and that he was about to die badly on a worthless world for strangers, with no glory, no witness, no reward, no luck, nothing but the creed. For those we cherish, we die in glory. And there was no glory in it at all. There was only mud and fire and a screaming that had been his friend, and he did it anyway. And that, Neris said years later to the scribe, and this is where the record has her voice breaking. That is what a hero actually is, not the golden ones in the devotional plates. That, a tired man doing the last right thing in the dark where no one will ever know, because it is right, and for no other reason, because there is no other reason left. I will give you the 90 seconds, because Neris lived them from the top of the ramp and could not look away, and because they are the last of the lamenters, and they deserve a witness, which is the one thing they never got, and the one thing this account can still give them. Rael went into the tide first, the berserk god, and the swarm broke on him and could not pull him down, exactly as he had known it would not, and he bought perhaps 40 of the 90 seconds by himself, a thing no sane warrior could have done, a thing only the rage could do, which is why he had chosen the rage, spent his own soul as ammunition, because it was the only ammunition the curse had left him. And Sarael held the other side of the ramp approach, sane, unhelped, with a chainsword and a combat knife and 2 centuries of skill and nothing else. And he did not have the rage's tirelessness, and he did not have bolts, and he did not have brothers, and he held anyway. And Nerys watched him take wound after wound, watched the tide open his armor, watched the yellow plate go red, watched him stagger and set himself and stagger and set himself, and not step back, not once, because behind him was a ramp with 800 people on it, and the ramp needed 90 seconds, and he had decided to be the 90 seconds. And the whole time, over the open channel, Nerys could hear him, not screaming. The last son of the cursed 21st held the ramp and spoke, calmly, steadily, to the people behind him, whom he could not see and would never meet. And what he said was a count. He was counting them aboard. He had heard somehow in the chaos that Nerys was tallying the survivors up the ramp, and he took it up, out loud, between blows, a demigod bleeding to death on a burning field, keeping the count for a records adjutant, because it was the last useful thing he could do. That's 600. Keep them coming. 700. You're nearly there, adjutant. Don't stop. Don't let them bunch. 750. Good. That's good. That's so many. That's so many more than none. His voice tightening with the wounds, never stopping. 800. Nearly, nearly. Get the last of them up. Get them up. The lifter's engines caught. The ramp began to rise, and Nerys' soul at the top of it, with 811 survivors behind her, did the only thing she had left to do, which was to remember. She looked down through the closing gap at Sergeant Sarael, and he looked up. For 1 second he looked up and found her face, and she will swear to the day she dies that he smiled. And she opened her hand and showed him what was in it. Tavion's bolt round, the joke, the one that fit. The account is closed and it balances. And she saw him see it, and she saw him understand, and she saw the last son of the cursed 21st laugh, once, a real laugh, in the last 2 seconds of his life, at a dead friend's joke, before the ramp sealed and the lifter tore up into the poisoned sky, and Cadmus fell away below into fire. The lifter was overloaded, and it should not have flown, and it flew anyway, wallowing up through the poisoned sky on straining engines. And there was a moment. Nerys braced for it. She had learned by then to brace for the last cruelty. A moment when she was certain the lifter's engines would choke, that the Lamenters' curse had climbed aboard with them and would drop them all back into the fire at the last second, that the universe would not permit even this. It did not happen. The lifter held, and Nerys understood slowly, over the hours of the climb to orbit, the one mercy in the whole account, the thing that made it a lament and not simply a massacre. The curse had stayed on the ground. The Lamenters' bad luck had followed them for 100 years, and it had followed them across Cadmus stroke by impossible stroke. But it had not, in the end, followed the mortals onto the lifter. The gunship had failed. The survivors' lifter flew. The shield had sealed the Lamenters in. It did not seal the mortals out. The lance strike had come down on the Lamenters' field. It spared the crowd. Every single time, at the very last, the catastrophe fell on the cursed sons and spared the people they carried, as though the curse, having spent a century taking everything from the Lamenters, could not quite reach past them to the ones they shielded. As though the shielding worked, not just against the tide, but against the curse itself. The Lamenters' own bodies a wall between their misfortune and the mortals in its lee. That is the closest thing to grace in the whole story. The Lamenters could not escape their curse, but they could stand in front of it one last time and take it, all of it, so that 811 people walked out from behind them into a future the curse never touched. It was the one fight they were built for, and the one fight, at the very end, they won. And the price of winning it was that not one of them survived to know they had. The exterminators came an hour later. From orbit on the lifter, they watched a whole world turn to ash. The 4th Hab District, the arterial road, the Vaughan interchange, the Salvation Fields, all of it. And somewhere in all of it, the bodies of 9 yellow-armored men who had no graves and would get no records and would be, within a year, forgotten by an Imperium that had never known their names to begin with. 811 people lived. That is the whole of it, and I want to give you the shape of the grim dark truth in it before I let you go, because Neris' soul spent 41 years finding it, and she should not have to find it alone. Any other chapter would have been right to leave them. Understand that. That is not cynicism. It is the actual moral arithmetic of the actual galaxy these people live in. 61,000 doomed nobodies on a world already lost, against 9 irreplaceable Astartes and the strategic weight of a hive fleet war. Every tactical doctrine in the Imperium says you write the district off, and every other chapter would have, and they would have been correct, and 811 people would have died in the ash with the other 60,000, and no one, anywhere, would ever have called it a wrong. The Imperium is built on that arithmetic. It runs on it. It is why the Imperium survives. And the Lamenters looked at that arithmetic, knowing it was correct, knowing their own curse, knowing that their coming would cost them everything and might save no one. And they came anyway because they had decided a long time ago in their sorrow that a doctrine which lets you leave people to die is a doctrine they would rather be destroyed than obey. They are not unlucky by accident, Neris came to believe. They are unlucky because the universe of the 41st millennium is a machine that runs on the acceptable loss, and the Lamenters are the one part of it that refuses to accept the loss, and a machine grinds hardest against the part that will not turn with it. Their curse is not bad fortune. Their curse is goodness, in a universe that has no place for it and punishes it wherever it appears. And they know that, and they are good anyway, which is the only definition of heroism the 41st millennium permits, and the most terrible one there is. Neris' soul kept the bolt round for the rest of her life. She never fired it. It would not have fit anything she owned, and that was the point. She kept the manifest too, the last one, the tally of 811, and she added to it, over the years, in her careful records adjutant's hand, one more entry at the bottom, and she made the scribe copy it into the account exactly, and so it is the last thing in the record, and it is the last thing I will give you. 9. Sergeant Sarael, Brother Rael, Brother Tavian, Brother Kalin, Brother Ostian, Brother Kale, Brother Halcyo, Brother Zadiel, Brother Iael, the cursed 21st, Lamenters, lost at Cadmus. Cause of loss. They came when no one else would. There is no one left who remembers them. I am the record. While I live, the account is not closed. There the account ends. There is no entry for the Lamenters lost at Cadmus in any imperial record. The world was struck from the rolls. The district was never scheduled, and the 811 were resettled and dispersed, and their story was believed by no one, because the story a survivor tells about kind giants who died of bad luck is not a story the Imperium has any use for. Only this remains. a woman's ledger, and a bolt round that fit no weapon, and the number 811, carried by one records adjutant for 41 years against the forgetting. Remember them, traveler. It costs you nothing, and it is the only thing they ever asked, and no one gave it to them. Somewhere the sons of sorrow are still marching toward the sound of people who need them, knowing exactly how it ends, and going anyway. That is the domain of the void-born terrors, where the monsters are cruel and the heroes are cursed, and the only difference between them, in the end, is which way they were facing when the dark came. Sleep if you can, and be kinder than the galaxy. It is the one revenge that was ever available to any of us.